This happened to me quite a while ago, but I still remember it as if it happened yesterday. I'm a female, and back then I was working at a call center. I used to work the night shift there occasionally, due to the fact that the company wasn't a big one, more of a startup. The bosses could only justify one employee working the night shift alone. It was tough. I remember calling my boss regularly because I was unsure of what to do alone at night there. It really brought me to the verge of tears sometimes. I remember even occasionally crying on the phone to him after something stressful happened on the night shift. After some time, though, I managed to come to grips with things and my own role in the company. It was a couple of months into my employment that the day in question arrived. That night, everything was going smoothly so far. I happened to be working with a part-timer this night. He came over to my desk and let me know he was leaving. During the day shift, the call center is filled with people, and it gets quite noisy at times. But at night, the place is deathly quiet, and it's very unsettling. All the lights would be off except the one section you were working in. In the rest of the building, it was completely dark. It was incredibly isolating feeling. Sometimes a fax or something would come in from a customer, and I would have to race through the darkness over to the fax machine, grab the paper, then run back to the safety of the light. It always scared me. I always had this fear someone would be hiding between one of the desks or lurking behind the machines. It got to about 1 a.m. on this night, and I was tidying everything up, very relieved that another night shift was finally over. I put the key in the door to unlock it and let myself out when I started to hear a very strange noise. It sounded like the sound of water, like a toilet flushing or something. It was coming from somewhere right behind me. I turned around and noticed the bathroom right behind me. Instantly, I thought, okay, it's just the part-time worker. I realized after only a moment, though, that he had already gone home about 2 hours ago. I tried to calm myself down a bit. I thought that perhaps it might be an employee from another company on the floor below or something. I knew deep down there wasn't supposed to be anyone else in this building working this late, though. I knew that sound was coming from the bathroom on my floor. The bathroom which still had all the lights out inside. I stood there, staring at the bathroom's frosted window, thinking about what to do next. At that point, I remembered something else. The bathroom had a sensor you had to hover your hand in front of to activate the flush, which meant there was definitely someone in there. It wouldn't be activating on its own. There was no doubt about it in my mind. I froze on the spot. I didn't want to make a single sound. I didn't want to find out who or what was in that bathroom. I ran downstairs and out of the building and made sure I locked the door behind me first. A couple of weeks later, I thought I was overworking myself on the job, so I decided to leave the company. I thought all the stress and late nights might have made me hallucinate whatever I'd seen. My colleagues were all very nice and threw me a leaving party. I happened to overhear from one of my colleagues, though, that there were rumors about strange goings-on in the call center, things being moved at night, sounds coming from different areas. They all thought it might have been a ghost in the building. Some of the employees were saying they had even seen a woman in the bathroom at night. I was skeptical but very interested. A few months later, I heard from the same colleague that the mystery of the call center ghost and that woman had been solved. Apparently, a homeless woman had been creeping into our building, crawling through the vents. The building was quite old, you see, and there was enough room for her to fit in. My colleague tried to apprehend her, and she tried to attack him. She may not have been of sound mind, though. At least, that's what I've been told. It's pretty creepy, knowing that my fears had been completely justified, and that while working alone there at night, there had actually been someone in that bathroom many times, and I'd never even suspected. I'm glad I got out of there when I did. I work in a nursing home. About a month ago, an elderly woman who had been diagnosed with a severe mental disorder was introduced to our care home. She seemed perfectly coherent, and we even shared a conversation together. I was surprised by the diagnosis, to be honest. She was really switched on for her age, which was 75 years old. Her responses to questions and her conversations were quite articulate. It was to the point where my colleagues and I seriously doubted her diagnosis. She had been a total joy in her first morning at our care home. At least, that's what I heard. I came into work, as I was working the night shift that day. At about 2 a.m., the nurse call button was pressed. I went in to check on her, and she simply said that she'd pressed it by accident. I told her not to worry too much, and thought nothing of it. I went to attend my chores down the hall, but not 10 seconds had passed by when the call light appeared again from her room. Another nurse responded this time. I remained in earshot for a moment, though. I was in the corridor, and her door was closed because it was so late. There was no other noise in the home going on, so I could hear just about every word they were saying. My colleague asked for the reason why she'd rung the bell. The lady said to her, "That man from before." "Yeah? What about him?" "He frightens me. He has 2 faces. He really frightens me." The old lady went on further. "She has a beautiful face, but don't let her trick you. She wants to kill you. If you look in her eyes, she'll eat you." "But he's a male member of staff, ma'am. Perhaps you can't see her. She's right there," the lady shouted. It was quite alarming to hear. This lady, who had been so pleasant until now, was shouting in the dead of night about something only she could see. It felt totally out of character. She sounded completely exasperated with it too. I knew, though, that there were no doors or windows anybody could possibly be peering in at her through, since we didn't have windows in our bedroom facilities. The only door was the one I'd entered earlier. Since my colleague wasn't aware I'd been eavesdropping, she came out of the room and saw me. She stepped back in shock, and I said nothing. I carried on walking down the hall. It got to about 3 a.m., and it was time for my break to sleep for a couple of hours. By the time I'd woken up a little further into the morning, the lady was seemingly back to normal again. When I spoke to her, she harbored no ill feelings towards me, nor did she seem distressed at all when she saw me. I didn't think much more of it. When quitting time came, I went home as usual. When I came back to work 2 days later, though, things had changed quite a bit. The lady was now pressing the nurse call button every hour, since 1 a.m. for the last 2 nights. She always stated there was someone in the room with her, and she couldn't stand them just staring at her. She couldn't sleep. She could see people hanging from the ceiling glaring at her. She had escalated so much it had been difficult to calm her down. This went on for about a month or so. She'd constantly ring the bell now, complaining of someone in the roof staring at her. Whenever I went to answer the call button, she would always say she'd rung the bell by mistake. She would then tell the next staff member that the woman who answered the call was frightening her, even though I was a man. I just want to throw out there that I looked nothing like a lady either. It was like this lady was frightened of death. It was manifesting in her everyday life, and she was seeing it everywhere. It's very frightening to see, because in the daytime, she's the most coherent of all the patients in our facility. At night, it's like she truly falls ill, and she can see something that nobody else can. I think every now and then about what it means for me that she sees me as this demented thing that really scares her. Mostly, I just pray for her, though. I pray for the day that she's not tormented by whatever illness comes to her at night. It's a very sad sight to see. I'm a nurse who works the night shift, and there have been 2 occasions where I've been stalked on my way home. I'd like to share them with you. This first one happened when I was living in Chicago. I was returning home on the last train of the night. It was around 12:30 or so. When you get off the train and exit the subway, there's a convenience store at the top of the stairs. My apartment at the time was about 7 minutes away from this store in a residential area. At that time of night when you get off the last train, the lights on the convenience store are pretty much the only light source in the area. The roads are pretty empty too. Anyway, back onto the story. I was climbing up the subway stairs when I noticed a man waiting at the top of them, staring down at me. He kept widening his eyes as he stared at me. He was shifting around very restlessly too. At that moment, I knew there was something off about this guy. I ignored the traffic lights and crossed the road. I decided to very quickly walk home. This situation was way too creepy to linger in. As I was walking along though, I felt a presence behind me. I looked over my shoulder and noted that weird guy from the subway entrance was now following me. He was closing the distance between us without any hesitation whatsoever. Instinctively, I started running. I remember running like crazy. I was so panicked and frightened that there was no one on the streets to help me. No passing cars, no people out walking. It was so dark too. I ran up a pathway into somebody's private garden and pushed the gate aside. I hid there and crept around to the back of the house. It overlooked the road, so when I saw a taxi passing by, I saw my chance to escape this situation. The taxi driver must have seen how desperate I was because he slowed down right away. He pretty much saved me that night. After this event, I moved into an apartment right in front of a different train station. This area seemed much safer, as it had 24-hour taxi services. Thus, it was well lit and was always busy with people, even at night. It was a very reassuring feeling to have others around. I had been living in this new place for about 2 years now, when something else happened to me. Of course, it took place when I was coming home from my night shift yet again. In those days, when I left the hospital to go home, I used to take this quick shortcut through a dark alleyway. It was there that I met the exact same man again. I quickly headed to the train station. I boarded my train, and I saw him again. As I sat down, the man continued staring at me. I knew it was him because he was doing that weird eye-widening thing I'd seen him do in the subway entrance. He must have followed me from the alleyway onto the train. I had a terrible feeling about this guy. He kept glancing over at me and fidgeting back and forth in his seat. The train started to pull into my destination. I got as close as I could to the doors. As soon as they opened, I sprinted out as fast as I could run to an exit. I knew they had to be busy at this moment. I even took off my jacket and tried to blend into the crowds of people. When I found a safe place to hide, I looked over my shoulder. I could see the man had indeed tried to follow me, but it seemed he'd lost me in the crowd. He was desperately searching the area for me. I knew how much danger I was in. Luckily, there was police presence at the west exit of the station. In the following days, I became very paranoid that man might somehow know where I lived, or might be waiting to ambush me at that station. The next time I got off at that stop, I told the police everything I could about the man. One of the officers actually seemed to know the man I was speaking of. They described him as a pervert. When he said that, shivers went down my spine. There were a lot of young nurses who worked late like I did back then. It's been 10 years on now. I still get creeped out thinking about it. As peaceful as it can be, be careful whenever you're walking home at night. You never know who you might run into. This happened when I was working as a part-time cleaner in a hospital. I would clean at about midnight, as there were less patients and doctors around. Those were the working hours I'd been given, so I couldn't really complain at all. One night, after all my cleaning was done, I had put my equipment away and got in the elevator and headed for the ground floor. At that time in the night, there were basically no doctors, nurses, nor anyone else around. It was really quiet. I couldn't hear or see any of the patients. I got in the elevator and pressed the button for the ground floor like always. Except this time, despite me pressing the button for the ground floor, the elevator continued to go downward, down to the underground floors. I continued to press the button for the ground floor over and over, but it was no good. The elevator just wouldn't stop. Finally, it did come to a rest at the second basement floor. This was really weird. It had never happened before. I didn't like this floor at all, especially not at nighttime. All that was down here was the post-mortem examination rooms. So who was calling the elevator down to this area at this time of night? I wondered if I really was the only night shift worker that night. Why would someone be messing with the elevator like this anyway? I got out of the elevator on this floor and went to check to see if anyone had wandered down here without permission. Behind me, I heard the sound of the elevator doors closing, which really shocked me. I heard the elevator start heading back up. Now I was down here alone. It was going non-stop to the highest floor in the building. I couldn't understand why the elevator was acting like this. Up to the area it was headed to, there was nothing but a storeroom and a door which accessed the roof. It was off limits to the patients anyway, and only the cleaning staff like me had any business going up there. I called the elevator back down to the floor I was on. It finally arrived, but when the doors opened, there was no one inside. There was something wrong, though. As I got in, I smelled something terrible. The elevator stank of copper, and I recognized that smell. It was the smell of blood. I could smell it all throughout this elevator area. Yet the elevator was completely clean and spotless, at least from what I could see. I couldn't bear that smell. I had to get out and use the stairs on the floor above. As I entered the stairwell, though, I was certain that someone was watching me. It felt as though someone was nearby. I ran as fast as I could up those stairs, but I couldn't escape that feeling. I felt for sure that I was not alone, but every time I tried to look around and check, I couldn't actually see anybody else there. I finished my shift and felt extremely creeped out on the long walk home. Once I'd arrived back to my place, though, I felt a lot better. I had work the next day, and I was a little bit apprehensive. I saw some of my colleagues, and they were asking me if I'd heard the news about last night. I said I didn't know, and asked what happened. They said that someone had taken the elevator to the top floor, and supposedly they'd jumped off. The body was admitted to the morgue that night, last night. It was shocking to hear that. I didn't really believe in anything paranormal, so I didn't make the connection to what happened the night before. I just went on with my work as usual. The next day was a day off for me. I invited a friend over for a few drinks. He's a pretty strange guy to some. He claims to have second sight or something. You know, the ability to sense the presence of the dead. I thought he might get a real kick out of my little mysterious experience, so I told him what happened. He listened carefully, but began to fidget quite a bit. I figured he just needed to go to the toilet, so I ignored him. Suddenly, he shot to his feet and said he was leaving. I asked him what the problem was. I said I had loads more booze and I needed his help to drink it all. He couldn't be convinced to stay, though. I was annoyed at him, and instead of staying up and drinking alone, I decided to go to bed instead. I had a terrible nightmare that night. I was being forced into this small, confined area. Cold steel and metal was all around me. It was a horrible dream. The next day, I asked my friend what his problem was and why he'd left so abruptly. This is where it gets really weird. I'm just letting you know what he said, not saying I actually believe it myself. He said that while I was talking, for some reason he looked over towards my door and saw someone peering in at us through the gap in the letterbox, you know, the mail slot. I didn't like looking at the mail slot after that. I always wondered, Could that poor person who jumped be a spirit or something who led me to the morgue and followed me home? Was that the thing that was watching me through the mail slot? Or was that completely unrelated? I don't know. It's all hard to believe. I hope my friend was just messing with me. It wasn't really a funny prank if that was the case, though. I ended up moving away shortly after to get a better job anyway, and things got better after. Just a strange little tale I wanted to share. Thanks for listening. Lately, I've been rethinking my career choice. I currently work as a location manager in the city where I live. For those people who may not specifically know what I mean, when I say location manager, it basically means that I'm responsible for finding locations for directors to film and secure locations for film production. I know it may not seem like a glorious job, but this industry is quite crazy, and I had to secure any job I could get. I love movies and the entire entertainment industry. It's always been a dream of mine to work in this field, one way or another. As it turns out, I was quite good at being a location manager. Over time, I was able to build up quite a bit of credibility, which made it even easier to secure locations. I worked on a bunch of films for the last several years, some bigger than others, of course, mostly some low-budget films. During my time doing this, I met a ton of famous actors and influential people in the industry. At this point, you're probably wondering why then I would be rethinking my career choice. Everything about this seems super cool so far. The simple answer is this world of film and entertainment really burns you out quicker than anything else. However, that's not the main reason why I've truly been rethinking my career. In actuality, the straw that broke the camel's back is much darker and more sinister. The last movie I worked on was not a great movie, plain and simple. Everybody is entitled to their opinions, of course, but objectively speaking, this was one of those ultra-sappy things you'd find on the Hallmark Channel. It just felt very uninspired. I will say, though, that the crew on this production was very amazing. I loved the writers and directors, and even some of the actors. They were all very nice. We ended up getting to know each other and even going out to hang out on a couple of occasions. The beauty of working on these smaller productions is that you really get to form a bond with a lot of the crew, which is something I imagine doesn't really happen on massive Hollywood-type film sets. One of the extras in the film, who had a handful of lines, started to hang out with me quite a lot. Her name was Hannah, and like a lot of extras, she was, and I believe still is, an aspiring actress. Hannah is someone I would describe as remarkably beautiful. When she walked into the room, heads would turn, and that's not even an exaggeration. When the director met her, he was so blown away that he even gave her a very minor part in the movie. She literally only had like 5 lines, but I assume that's sort of a big deal for your very first outing. In the several weeks that we worked on the movie, Hannah seemed to take a real liking to me. At first, I was really into it as well. After Hannah's small part was over, she stuck around with me and helped me out a lot. She was basically an unofficial assistant, and helped me with a lot of the day-to-day tasks. I made sure, of course, that I was able to pay her for her efforts, like any upstanding production would. Towards the end of the shooting, though, tensions can get a bit high, and people can get really short with you. What happened on our last day of production was something altogether different, though. Often on film sets, filming can take place overnight, and that was the case for this final day of production. Hannah was on location with me, helping me out, but there seemed to be something off about her. She was always upbeat and excited, but tonight she was in another world. She was quiet, dismissive, and very rude, for a lack of a better word. I'm not sure what time it was, but it was sometime in the middle of the night. We had a small crew of art department guys setting up the location. I was there basically just overseeing everything, and Hannah was just there helping me. The director and the actors for the scene were there, but they were all resting in the back room for a moment while we were filming inside. When everyone finished, they all headed out, and it was just myself and Hannah in this location. In all the years I've worked on movies, I had never seen such a light crew. You could tell the feelings and vibes for this project just weren't all there. I tried making conversation with Hannah and joking around with her like usual, but all my efforts just sort of failed. She kept brushing me off. Honestly, I didn't really care anymore. I figured once we wrapped everything up, I'd never see her again. While I was awkwardly walking around the set trying to figure out what to do, I heard Hannah shout for me. It sounded like it was coming from quite a distance away. She had been right next to me, so I found it quite weird. I rushed over to make sure she was okay. When I got there, though, she was standing in the back of the room with all the lights off. I could barely even see her. The only lights were the lights shining into the room from the doorway I was now standing in. "Hannah? What's wrong? Are you all right? What's going on?" I called out with genuine concern. She just smiled at me and said almost in a seductive kind of voice that sounded a bit off, "I have something for you." As you may expect, my mind was racing. I had a feeling that maybe this girl had an interest in me, and now she wanted me to join her in this room alone. I approached her cautiously. I was feeling a bit of apprehension about this whole situation. When I was about 5 feet away from her, I noticed her hand behind her back. I stopped in place and tried to make a joke. "What do you have behind your back there? You're not gonna stab me or something, are you?" I laughed, trying to make light of this strange situation. At that moment, Hannah started to cry uncontrollably. I didn't even know what I'd done to upset her. Before I could say anything, she started screaming at me. "I liked you so much, and all you ever cared about was this stupid movie. I hate you." As I tried to take in all that she'd just said, she drew a knife from behind her back. She ran right through me and knocked me right off my feet. My heart was beating out of my chest at this point. When I finally managed to get up where I was standing and looked down at the ground, I could see she had dropped a knife next to me. A real knife. For some reason, I never reported this to the director or the authorities. I have no idea why, really. I just figured since nothing had actually happened to me, I was better off leaving it alone. The more time that passes, though, the more I think about that night and what might have happened if I'd just kept walking towards her. Would she have stabbed me, or was it all just a trick? If it wasn't the middle of the night, would she have even tried anything like this in the first place? Perhaps the most horrifying thing, though, is I have no idea where she is or where she went after. She's got like no social media anymore. I looked and there were no other film credits either, at least not that I could find. This industry is crazy, man. You meet a lot of strange people who sometimes aren't all there. Take Hannah, for example. A normal, sweet, and beautiful girl one night, and then the next brandishing a knife at me. I don't know if it was the sleep deprivation or all the hours we were working, but she just lost it. I think of the highs and lows of this industry. They've always taken a toll on me. As I've stated, I assume she's probably still trying to act, maybe under a different name or something. But clearly, this poor girl had some inner demons, and it wouldn't surprise me one bit if some of them were in her head as well. To preface this, I live in a college town with 6 other young girls, all of us in our 20s. The city we live in is not that nice, and has a huge homeless/drug problem. Break-ins are not unusual either. What happened last Saturday, though, was definitely quite strange. My roommates and I, as well as some of our boyfriends, were hanging out and drinking in our house. 2 of the girls opted to go out to a bar, though. By around 1 a.m., the 2 girls had come home from the bar, and everyone was really tired. We all went over to our respective rooms to retire for the night. As it got later on, though, I was awoken by someone opening my door and standing in my room, staring in at me. In my head, I thought it must have been one of my roommate's boyfriends, trying to see if my boyfriend and I were still awake to continue to party. Since I was so tired, I pretended to be asleep in order to avoid being bugged about it. After a bit, the person closed my door and proceeded to pace back and forth in the hallway. They then began to attempt to open my roommate's door, whose room was right next to mine. Luckily, her door was locked, and she also had her boyfriend with her. The person then proceeded to go through our utensil drawer and grabbed a knife. I could hear them attempting to pick her lock after. After gaining some courage, I guess, I heard her boyfriend shout, "Who the fuck is that?" through the door. Obviously, that startled the man, who then sprinted up the stairs and back out the door. The police were called and did a search, but obviously they couldn't find anything. They told us break-ins like this are normal, which we all knew already. What makes this whole scenario creepier, though, is that he didn't steal anything at all. My phone, my expensive alcohol, and my $600 shoes were all untouched. This person was not on drugs or alcohol either, as they moved very quietly and deliberately. He was only able to get in at all because the two girls who came home from the bar forgot to lock the door behind them. I'm not sure what this man's intent was, but I'm forever grateful that I happened to have my boyfriend with me and pretended to be asleep. My boyfriend is not there often, as he lives 3 hours away. It gives me chills, thinking that strange man was in my room, and what could have happened to me had I been all alone. I'm from the UK, if that's any context. Way back in 2016, when the whole killer clown epidemic was huge, I was walking through the woods at around 10 p.m. alone in order to get to a party/gathering that was happening in a secluded part of the forest. It was almost pitch black, and I could barely see in front of me, besides the flash on my phone. Everything seemed normal as I continued walking to this party. I got to this long stretch of woods with no defined path, but it was the quickest way to get to the area I was looking for, so I took it. As I got around midway through, though, I heard something off to my left. As I turned to check what it was, I saw a shadowed figure sitting on a fallen log. I was understandably unnerved, but I couldn't make it out very well. Was this really a person or just shadows from the moonlight? I made the mistake of shining my phone light directly at whatever this was and was instantly terrified. Sat there all alone in the middle of the woods was a large man dressed as a clown, full face paint and sporting the creepiest smile imaginable. I tried to call 5 different people as I was passing him by when I heard him get up behind me. I instantly started sprinting towards the end of the long stretch onto a path that had a barbed wire fence down the side of it. During the sprint, I was pretending to be on the phone with one of my friends. I could hear the clown running after me, but there was no chance in hell I would be turning around to check if I was right. When I got to the end, I jumped over the fence as fast as I could, badly cutting myself as I did so. I then turned around and kept running backwards as I saw the clown now stood behind the fence, staring at me and smiling. I didn't stop running until I got to the party, and I was scared for a very long time afterwards. You have to bear in mind, there were many rumors of people being killed by people dressed as clowns at the time. I'll never know if that man had such evil intentions or was merely thinking it was funny to try and scare me. It was extremely strange and scary to live through, though. So, in conclusion, I hope to never meet any killer clowns in the woods again. For context, I live in a pretty run-down part of my city. This happened to me a few months ago, back in July. I was invited to my friend's house for dinner. After I ate and watched a movie with him, I had to go home, as it was getting pretty late now. I realized, though, that I didn't have enough for a ride home. I was also too embarrassed to borrow money from him. No worries, though, I lived just a short walk away from his house anyway. The rain wasn't that bad, and I did have my headphones so I could listen to tunes as I walked my broke-ass home. I walked on the empty road. Well, empty except for a few cars passing by occasionally. It was very comforting. I love these kinds of peaceful, lonely walks, very calming and all. Suddenly though, two dudes came out of a building behind me. They tried to huddle close under my umbrella. Sure, they seemed harmless, and they were older than me. They seemed to be friendly, so I figured what was the harm. They started to make small talk. That slowly increased to very personal questions about my home life. I realized I had never seen these guys around town before, so I gave them fake names, fake hobbies, fake family. I wouldn't get fucked over if this was some bizarre new scam method or something. "Hey, do you think your mother would miss you if you went missing?" one of the guys asked me. "Huh? What the hell are you talking about?" I replied. They were still acting all buddy-buddy with me, laughing, but I didn't take it as a joke. Call me a pussy or whatever, but the way they said that very casually really messed me up. I picked up the pace, but they still followed. Now, I wasn't about to give these guys a tour of my house. When they started to get real creepy with the questions, I veered off course and started heading to the convenience store. I knew it had people in it right about now. "Why don't you invite us over to your house for a cup of coffee?" This dude, who I'd only met a few minutes ago, who I barely knew, now wanted to come to my house. I was really shaken at this point. The whole time we were walking, I had only taken short glances at them. I mustered up the courage to turn to my left so I could fully identify these people. The dude's face was different. He looked high, drunk maybe. I turned to the right. He smirked, then his face dropped. He then tried to pull something out from his pocket. Fuck that. I closed my umbrella and ran. I heard them running behind me. I ran harder. I looked back and could see they were gaining on me. I tripped, I slipped, and I got up each time. I could barely feel the muscles in my legs. I ran in and out of various alleyways to confuse them and lose them. The rain started to pour even harder. I hid behind a dumpster. I could hear them calling out my name, so I stayed put for a while. I only came out after I was sure they must have given up on the chase. I got to the store after walking a bit further. I went into the bathroom, looked at myself in the mirror, and threw up immediately. Maybe from adrenaline, or maybe because I'd run like hell. I had cuts and bruises all over. Most notably, I realized a huge gash on my shirt. I realized the man had probably pulled out a knife, and he must have tried to slash at me while I was hauling ass. I did what I should have done in the first place, and called up a friend to drive me home. He thought I'd gotten fucked up at a party, or had some sort of street brawl. I got home drenched and had the longest shower after. I never did tell anyone this story. Well, not up until now anyway. I threw away that shirt, and my headphones were destroyed by the rain. A small price to pay for an escape, I guess, though. I hope they were just high or drunk. If they were legit gonna commit a felony on me, I also hope I'm the first and last one they ever attempt. Back when I lived in the rural Midwest about 10 years ago, I lived in a house just off the highway. My house was right between one town and another, almost right on the county line. Our house had this big circle driveway. If you drove in the driveway, you would be going straight towards our barn. If you curved right, you could pull into our garage. If you went past the garage, you could circle around in front of the house and pull back out to where you started. Our house had large double doors on the front, which we rarely used. We basically always used the door that was inside our garage. One night, as it was very late, my doorbell rang. My husband, my 3-year-old daughter, and I were all asleep. It woke me up, and I thought maybe I had been dreaming. It rang again though, so I woke my husband up to check it out. He thought I was hearing things at first, until it started to ring again. It was obviously very dark outside, but we have a dusk to dawn light, so most of the driveway was well lit. Unfortunately, you can't really see out the front door unless you open the door and look out. You can open just one at a time, or you can open both by using 2 latch-like things that are on the top and bottom of one of the doors. My husband got up and I followed him. He decided he was going to open it and see what was going on. I wanted to call the cops, but because we live in the county line, we know it was going to be quite a while before someone could get there. He opened the door, only to see a girl in maybe her early 20s. She looked completely normal, except for the fact that she was standing at our door in the middle of the night. I looked past her and could see her car was pulled into my driveway, just a bit off the road. She said she needed to use the phone. Her car battery had died or something, and she was not sure what happened, but she couldn't get it to start no matter what she did. I told my husband, no fucking way. This was exactly how horror movies started. We offered to call the cops for her, which would be the county sheriff. She asked over and over, but I was not going to let her inside our house. We told her we would call someone else for her, and she kind of stomped off in anger. We watched her walk back to the car about 50 feet away. I could still obviously see her and her vehicle. At this point, I called the cops. They said they would be there as soon as they could, about 15 minutes. They didn't sound very concerned at this point, and to be honest, I wasn't really either. I mean, it was just some random young girl. What's she gonna do? She probably did have a dead battery. She opened the trunk, no lights come on. She rummaged around inside. Then the driver's door opened. Out steps a guy. The back passenger door opens. Out steps another guy. They all rummage around in the trunk. No lights on, and I can't hear anything either. I can't hear what they're saying or tell what they're doing. They all get back in the car together. Now, at that point, maybe 5 minutes had gone by. I was silently praying the sheriff really put his foot on the gas pedal and would get there quickly, but I knew it was going to be another 10 minutes or so. This group of suspicious people just sat there in the car with their lights off, not making any moves at all. I couldn't see them when they were in the vehicle, but I knew for sure they were still there. I knew they didn't get out of the car and sneak past the house because they would have had to walk right under the dusk to dawn light. I would have seen them. I thought I could see someone lighting a smoke inside, but I'm not sure about that part. This is when I see something. Yet another man walking towards the car from the right, coming from the direction of our barn. I had no idea who this man was. We didn't have a neighbor for at least a mile, and he was coming from the back of my property, which ends in a creek. He walked under the light straight to the car. He didn't even look at the house. He just walked inside and jumped in the back with everyone else. At that point, the car started up, and they slowly drove back out of my driveway and headed north. The cops arrived about 10 minutes later as promised, and at this point I was really freaking out. They searched around, but of course they couldn't find anything. They asked us if we'd gotten a plate number, but they were parked too far away for me to see. They told us to call if they came back, which was a real help to us. My husband went and grabbed his shotgun from the shop on our property, and we tried to go back to sleep. They never did come back though. I don't know who those people were, and I don't know what they wanted either. The first encounter that I'm aware of at least happened a few months ago. Recently, I think I've had another as well. For a bit of context, I, 24 and female, work in a small takeout restaurant very close to my apartment downtown. It's about an 8 to 10 minute drive. I'm the assistant manager, and there was a period of time where we were short-staffed. I was working some extra hours, and my consistent schedule/days were thrown off a bit. Anybody who's worked in a restaurant, especially as management, knows that week by week the schedule can change a lot. It's not your normal 9 to 5 Monday through Friday job. For privacy, I'm changing the name this person gave me, as they'd pretended to be another person, and I don't want that innocent person to get caught up in all of this. I usually close. I work from 4 p.m. to 12 a.m. usually, give or take a few hours. During this time, though, I had to swap some shifts with my boss and ended up opening for a few days. The crowd we get, depending on the shift, is actually very different. For privacy, I won't say exactly where I work, but it goes from a casual lunch craving to more of a party crowd on some days. One day, there was a situation where I stayed later than I usually do on an open, and I got a call to the store. That's not uncommon, as we do call-in orders all the time. A team member answered and looked a bit confused, then came right up to me. "Hey, some guy on the phone is asking for you?" I chuckled and made a bit of a joke. "I'm not the manager here after 5. He looked uncomfortable and confused, though. "No, he asked for you, not a manager." "You mean he knew my name?" "Yeah." Immediately, I was worried, but I tried to play it off a bit. I'm sure most of our regulars did know me by name. I have a few sweet regulars that we see all the time. I went and grabbed the phone, expecting it to be one of those customers that usually call orders in every few days. But it wasn't. They had no caller ID, and it was from a strange area code not in our area. I didn't recognize the voice either. "Hello, this is the manager speaking. What can I do for you?" "Hey, my name. I know you remember me. My name is Jason. I come in there every Tuesday. You know me, I work at that building right across the street. My car broke down. I need you to grab some cash from the drawer with my credit card or something. I got a flat at the big light right outside." Obviously, I didn't know this person at all, and I'm not ignorant to scam calls either. The name he gave isn't an uncommon one. I only have one regular with that name. Every Tuesday, 4 to 5 p.m. like clockwork. I curiously peeked out the window to the stoplight he'd mentioned. There was nothing there but moving cars. "Sorry, sir, I can't do that for you. It's corporate policy." His tone then shifted. You know me though. Hey, what's with you being there all the time? Don't you ever go home? I thought I saw you working this morning too." "You usually close on Tuesdays, don't you? I didn't expect to see you at all yesterday." After that, I don't remember the exact quotes. I was kind of freaking out a bit. He continued to have details of my schedule, when I would arrive or leave, even before or after store hours, or customers would be there. I asked who this was again, because I have a lot of regulars. He repeated his name as Jason and described himself physically. This is where I truly started to panic. The name and description he'd given me was of my regular Tuesday customer Jason, except Jason was right there with me, sitting in my dining room enjoying his food. I'd just made his order. He was sitting right there, not on his phone at all, not being weird or looking at me either. This person knew my schedule. They knew when I'd leave the store. They knew the names and descriptions of all my other regulars. I told my boss and we blocked the number. Out of curiosity, I tried to Google it as well. It was a fake number with a random area code from out of state. It was not in our system. We had a staff meeting to reiterate to never tell customers who was working or when their shifts are. That's never really been an issue with our staff though. It's a very small and tight-knit team. We have a buddy system now, even just to take out the trash or something. Nobody is allowed to be alone in the store after dark either. I take a different route home now sometimes too. I still get nervous whenever anyone gives me that or a similar name. I've never met anyone since then or before that I can remember that had that voice. That is, until recently. This is already very long, but I have more context and information about pieces of this story that make it even worse. Like a coworker knowing the owner of the place he claimed to work at. Nobody by that name works there, obviously. We've had a few suspicious people park out front, sit, and then leave since then. Recently, I got a call-in order under the same name as well. The voice was similar, but the phone was muffled. I had a hard time taking their order. It was a large order, but they never came to pick it up. I threw it away at close. There was a car I did not recognize in the back parking lot when I left. I got scared and took an alternate way home that night, so I can't be sure if that was them. So let me first say I don't know if this story I'm about to tell is super scary, but it is for sure the strangest thing that's ever happened to me. In the moment, it was really upsetting. It wasn't until I reflected on the evening that I realized just how strange an occurrence it really was. 5 years ago, I worked as a security guard for the strip mall. If you're not familiar with what a strip mall is, it's basically a block of stores in a single lot that's usually connected by one big building. The complex I worked for was a bigger building, consisting of either 8 or 9 stores. There was also a restaurant as well. The strip mall was new at the time, and the management team wanted to keep the area clear of trouble and potential robbers. I figured someone trying to rob these stores would be a real long shot though, since the surrounding area was a very high-class neighborhood, and there really was no crime here. I took the job mainly because I needed money, and I figured it would be very easy. I could sit in my car or in a back office that was located in the back of the building complex, and just listen to podcasts or other audiobooks. That back office I mentioned served almost like a central hub for all the stores in the strip mall. Each of the store's back stock rooms, you could walk out into another hallway which would lead you down a long, narrow corridor, and they all led directly to the office. It was a small little room with monitors connected to the cameras in each one of the stores. Most nights I just sat in that back office and waited until about 6:30 a.m., with nothing really happening. For all the years I did this job, only once did I ever have an intruder, and it still freaks me out to this day. The very first thing I did every night at 11 p.m. sharp when I showed up to work was check every lock on every store and make sure everything was buttoned up tight just in case. I usually then would walk around the entire mall parking lot. I would like to tell you that I was just being very diligent in my monitoring of the surroundings, but the real reason was to exercise my legs. I usually did this walk several times a shift. That night at around 2 in the morning, I was still sitting in the office when I thought I heard a crashing sound. Whatever it was loud enough to make me jump in surprise. The first thing I did was check all the cameras, of course, and made sure none of the alarms were going off either. Everything still looked to be locked up. It appeared like nothing was going on the alarms either. Whatever noise I had heard, I ended up just chalking it up to some sort of stock in one of the stores falling down or something. I did a quick walk by all the storefronts just to be sure though, and saw nothing out of place or broken. Everything was still locked up tight. When I got back to the office was when I noticed something strange though. One of the monitors, which was a CCTV camera feed from one of the stores, I could see what looked like a faint light. I just walked by all those stores less than 2 minutes prior, and I'd seen no such thing. Whatever the strange glow was had just appeared. The cameras in these stores were not insanely high-tech, so I wasn't able to adjust the cameras to see any more of the store. Only this one section it was pointed at. This store was an electronics store of some sort. They sold all kinds of tech and electronics, but their main selling point was that they would rent out cameras and microphones and all sorts of equipment for people. I made my way through the narrow hallway to the back room of that electronics store. From the back room, I could see the flickering light through the door that led inside the store. Before going through the door which separated the store's back room and the sales floor though, I looked around the window to see if I could locate any intruder. To my amazement and horror, I saw there were two elderly people inside, just standing in front of a gigantic TV, watching a solid blue screen that said no signal. I had no idea how these two could have possibly gotten into the store. I checked the lock more than once, and there were clearly no signs of forced entry. I waited for several minutes to see if they would move or talk or do anything, but they never did. They just stood there still as statues, watching this blue screen. Eventually, I decided to confront them. I made my way onto the sales floor slowly and cautiously and asked what these two were doing. They couldn't be in there right now. The old woman of the two turned to me, who I could now clearly see was very old. She said to me, "I'm sorry, honey. This is the only show that makes him happy." I had no idea what she was talking about. She had tears flowing from her eyes. The man didn't even turn around. He just stood in an almost hunched over position and continued to stare at the signalless TV. After a moment, the woman turned back around and started to make these strange noises with her mouth. It was very unpleasant. I went into the back room and alerted my boss, who then alerted the authorities. It was quite clear to me that these elderly folk needed some help, really seriously. When I walked back onto the sales floor though, they were already gone. I started to run around the room rather frantically because I still didn't know if these two were any danger to me. When I looked back up and out the window, I saw that somehow these two elderly folks had made it to the very end of the parking lot. When I made my call, they must have left. I had no idea how they'd gotten so far in such a short time though. I noticed at this point the door was unlocked, so I know they left out the front door. That never explained though how they'd gotten inside in the first place. The only thing I can really think is that they were hiding in the store prior to them closing, which is still pretty unsettling. I tried shouting at them to come back, but they just kept on going. Then, without any prior warning or notice, they both darted into a heavily forested area that sat at the end of the strip mall complex. The fact these two older people moved so quickly was honestly remarkable. The police showed up moments later, and I explained the entire event to them. They actually laughed because the story seemed so strange and unbelievable. Even though it may have been funny to them in that moment, it was terrifying to me. Imagine just seeing these two very old people watching a blank TV in the middle of the night when you're all alone. I've read enough crazy news stories to know that just about anything is possible. After talking to the store owner, they were just as shocked and freaked out as I was. They said they didn't know of anyone who fit that description. I guess the police looked through dozens of hours of CC footage, but could never find when and where these two people had gotten into the building. Just thinking about that night, and really just how creepy and weird it truly was, it really makes me feel weird. In a lot of ways, I feel bad, because it shows the mind really does go after a while. In my mid-20s, I was trying to figure out a lot of aspects to my life. I was trying to get my future in order. I was never objectively a bad person, but somehow I always seemed to fall through the cracks anyway. I finished near the bottom of my class with my GPA, never went to college, experimented with some extracurricular things that you could say are illegal. I was never in any big trouble, but I also never really brought anything of substance to the table, if that makes sense. I was about a month away from my 26th birthday when I met Janelle. That's when I decided it was time to finally use my brain and become a decent member of society instead of a burnout. Only thing was, due to my disturbing resume or lack thereof at this point in my life, I was finding it very difficult to get a job, even jobs you may think anybody can get. I wouldn't even get a call back even if I went out of my way to reach back out to them. I would follow up on applications but still never have my call returned. It hit me hard. Just as I was about to give up like I always did, Janelle found me an amazing job. Not glamorous by any means, but for someone like me, it was pretty amazing. The job was for an overnight warehouse worker. I would work from 9 p.m. until 6:30 a.m., loading up pallets with boxes. Though the main premise sounds simple enough, it was very physically taxing. The job was tough and we never had enough help. It was extremely hard to keep any help that did come once they would get in the door. Because of this, I found myself working alone a lot of the time, until finally the company downsized. We started to work until 4:30 in the morning instead of 6:30. The little help that we had was spread thin. When I was working, I would put on headphones and just get into the zone. I didn't bother talking to anyone or even getting to know anyone else. Chances were I wouldn't even be seeing them in a week or two again anyway. Honestly, talking distracted me, and I was all about getting my job done and getting home. One night, when I was nearing the end of my shift, I noticed a small-looking man standing about 5 feet away from me. I didn't really say anything at first. I figured it was a new employee, just watching how I was doing things to get the hang of it. When I finished, I took off my headphones and asked the guy if he needed some help. "Yeah, man, I hate to ask, but I was wondering if I could get a ride home, maybe?" I found it really weird considering I had no idea who this guy was and didn't even recognize him as the face of one of the workers. Being the kind of guy I am, I told him I would as long as he paid me. They responded almost nervously. Yeah, man, of course, I got you." I told the guy to give me a few minutes to grab my things and punch out my shift and to meet me outside. He nodded and agreed. I felt somewhat weird about this situation, but I'd been in his shoes before. At least that's what I kept telling myself. I told one of the other guys when I was punching out that I had to give the weird new guy a ride home, and the other employees all made a strange face. "The new guy? What are you talking about? I don't remember seeing any new guys." We both kinda shrugged it off, assuming that's just how this place operates these days. I went outside a few minutes later and saw the strange guy waiting next to my car. What I didn't find alarming back then, I really wish I would have. I never told the guy which car I actually drove, yet somehow he was already waiting by my car outside. We started the drive and right away things started to get weird. I asked him where he lived and where we needed to go. He gave me some vague and confusing answer instead of telling me an address. I live on Maple Drive. Well, no, not anymore. I live, near the park, Rose Park by the edge of the city." I was getting very frustrated. "Okay, man, near the park? Where near the park? I just want to know where I'm dropping you off, dude." The guy said nothing for a few seconds, then just said, "Near the park head, towards the park. I'll tell you where to go." I'm still kind of in awe at my stupidity even as I write this. You have to really understand that at this point in my life, I didn't really care about much. I just wanted to get from point A to point B in my day-to-day life and return home to my girl. I didn't really question anything. When we got close to the park, the man finally spoke up. "Turn here." I stopped the car for a moment and said to this guy, "Are you sure? This doesn't even look like a street." The man just kept saying, Yeah, right here." His voice was shaking. He nodded intently, and against my better judgment, I turned down that long and dark path. This was for sure not a road at all. It was a dirt path and I couldn't see anything. I turned on my high beams. Thankfully, it was just in time. Obstructing the road in front of me was a massive fallen tree. "Oh, dude, looks like we're gonna have to go another way or something. I'm not getting by this tree." The man didn't say anything. I looked over at him, and he had his hands in his hoodie. While I was looking at him, he said, "Get out of the car now." He kept moving his hands inside his sweatshirt as though he was trying to grab something he had concealed underneath. When I looked up out the windshield, I saw 2 more masked men coming from the side of the fallen tree. My heart was racing out of my chest at this point. I didn't know if I was going to get robbed or worse. The man in my car then screamed at the top of his lungs, "Get out now!" I slowly started to open my car door. I noticed another 2 men step behind my car, also wearing masks. When my door was open and I'd started to step out, I noticed the man in my car had started to get out as well. That's when I made the single most daring decision of my entire life. When I noticed he was all the way outside the car, I jumped back in and reversed as fast as I could. Thankfully, he'd never ordered me to shut the car off, so the car was running this entire time. I may have ran over one of the potential robbers, or maybe I just bumped into a big tree branch. I couldn't be too sure in the heat of the moment, and I didn't really care either. When I got to the end of the dark path and was putting my car into drive so I could peel off, I looked back one last time and saw all 5 men sprinting directly at my car. They all appeared to be holding something in their hands, but I didn't bother to find out what they were carrying. I didn't alert the police for some reason either. When I got home, I was just so tense and anxious that I felt nauseous and needed to lie down. I called my managers the next day and told them about the incident, to which they replied they didn't hire anybody new in the last couple of weeks. I felt even more sick after hearing that. We looked at the cameras and saw the man had basically come out of the shadows when I parked my car for the night shift. They waited by my car for several hours, then finally went inside. Nobody said anything to this weird guy because help was so spread thin. Basically, nobody noticed him. He was watching me finish my shift for about an hour when he finally approached me. My manager said that they contacted the police, but I was never questioned, which I found kind of suspicious. That leads me to believe they never even actually reported it. To this day, I've still never reported it myself either. Honestly, it was so long ago at this point that I'm not really sure anything could be done even if I did. I only worked there for another month or so after the incident, and I never saw that strange man again. The only good thing that came from this horrible event was that the company finally started locking the doors for these overnight shifts. You may think that's an obvious thing to do, but you'd be surprised at just how relaxed certain businesses can be, especially when the managers aren't around. My advice to anybody who may be listening to this is to be careful, and if something feels weird, the chances are that you're right, and it is. My buddies and I were camping in the woods in Yosemite, California. We were the only ones in the area, and we knew this because of the camping registry. We were quite literally the only people in a 20-mile radius. Anyways, everything was going great and normal, and our campsite was right on the side of a lake. At night, we all shared an 8-man tent. It was cozy with 8 guys in there, but it was not too horrible. Anyways, at about 3 a.m. the first night, we were all suddenly awoken by one member of our group standing up in the tent and frantically opening the tent door. He poked his head out and, super panicked and nervous, said, "There's someone in our camp." He kept repeating it, sounding absolutely terrified. Needless to say, we were all scared that someone might be out there. We knew we were supposed to be alone. Everyone who had just woken up was looking at each other with horrified looks on our faces. After about 15 seconds of saying someone was in our camp, he laid back down like nothing had happened and fell right to sleep. As we went around to check, we saw that no one was there. The motherfucker had been sleepwalking, and he'd neglected to tell us about his little habit. Needless to say, it was hard to fall back asleep for the rest of the night. Just a warning before the story starts, it does contain some deceased animals, so if you don't like that sort of thing, you can skip this last story. Went hunting with my dad in Shawnee National Forest several years ago. I was about 10 years old or so. We took one afternoon to hike and scout out some hunting spots. Along the trail, we spotted something a bit weird. A few blood spatters and drops of blood. Not a huge deal. It's nature after all, and things get killed all the time. About a fourth a mile up the trail, however, we came upon 3 dogs hanging from a tree. All gutted, bled out, and skinned. Now that was a pretty weird and scary sight. We kept going a bit further, as there was a bluff not too far up that way that was pretty cool to look at. As we came up to the bluff though, we found weird symbols burned into the ground and on the sides of the rock wall. Candle wax was absolutely everywhere, and more blood was all over the ground. By that time, my dad, who I'd never seen scared in my entire life, looked at me and said we had to go. We took off at a pretty quick pace back to the camp. The worst part was we couldn't even leave the campsite at the moment, so that night I laid awake in the camper, freaking out at every sound I heard. I still get goosebumps thinking about that event to this day.